The garden itself is kind of a transition from the plains to the mountains. We have 6 different geological zones within or close by the park. We have 8 ecological zones close in or within the boundaries of the park. So we get a lot of geology students here in the summer that come in or during a semester and do some of their studies within the park to see the different geology of the park. The Native Americans been around here for thousands of years. They used to use this as a place to winter. We have fairly mild winters, and at that back then we had plenty of game in the area. There was plenty of water in the area, and so they would winter here. They did a lot of trading in this area. So, contrary to popular belief, it's not an area of religious significance to the American Indians, but of social significance. They wanted some place where they could feel safe while they were doing their trading. But the Arapaho, the Cheyenne, the Sioux, the Apache, the Utes all travel through this area. The Utes still come back in the summer every year and hold ceremonies in the park. They do dances over in the visitor center and so forth. But they used to come through here and travel through here up the pass on their way out to South Park after the buffalo. So they had a quite a heavy influence in this whole region. And we'll walk down a little bit and we'll talk about the geology of the park. But if you've got any questions, let me know, because this is all real important. The springs, Manitou Springs, Palmer established the springs after the Civil War. He was a Civil War general, came out here and built the Denver Rio Grande Railway. He taught Charles Perkins into coming out here as a partner, bought land out here, and helped establish the railroad. Perkins never lived out here. Really? Never lived out here. But they had the land out here. So Colorado Springs was originally developed in Manitou by Palmer as kind of a resort. He wanted the Eastern wealthy, their money, to come out here so they could invest in the railroad. So that's how it originally got started. And then around 1900, Manitou Springs became a city of sanitariums where they treated consumption, or as we know it today, TB. And there was a number of them over there. And there's still remnants of them over there, and you see them every once in a while. At Rockledge Ranch, the little hexagonal building that acts as a box office now was one of the sanitarium rooms that held patients in it. But all these red rocks, they're part of the Lions Formation. Runs from Wyoming all the way down through New Mexico. It's called the Lions Formation because that's where it was originally studied. It was Lyons, Colorado. The red solution, or the red color in the rocks, comes from a solution of 2 to 3% iron oxide that washed down through the rocks and discolored them. But now, that's a red rock, it's part of the Lions Formation. This white rock is part of the Lions Formation, exactly the same rock. They're both sandstone. Why that one's red and that one's white, nobody knows. It's a cause thing.
Yeah, right next, so close.
Yeah. Well, there was a third hogback that ran down through the center here, and over the last 65 million years has washed away and eroded away. We don't know if that had something to do with it. That's a younger rock than the red rock. So 65 million years ago, these were horizontal. And on the west side of the park here, there's a fault line where the northern tectonic plates meet. And 65 million years ago, the west side of that fault line rode underneath the east side and forced these into a vertical position. Before that, they were horizontal, and we went through a cycle of oceans, deserts over millennia. And so that's how these rocks got formed. The waves washed sand in, the wind blew sand in when we were deserts, and then with time and pressure and heat, they formed into the rocks. We don't know why that one's red and why that one's white. It's just it's one of those cause things. The holes you see in the rocks are caused by erosion. Initially, it's because waterfall flows down through the rocks, finds a little niche, and over time builds up pressure. And when it gets enough pressure, then just pops the rocks out with hydrostatic pressure. Now that hole may only be about the size of a golf ball or a tennis ball, depending on how big the pocket was. And then the normal forces of erosion, wind and rain, take over and enlarge the holes. Now they serve as a nesting place for all of our bird population.
Yeah.
And we have lots of birds here. We have white-throated swifts, we have magpies, we have jays, we have falcons, prairie falcons that nested on this side this year. Last year they nested over on the other side. We have towhees and all kinds of birds that live. We have rock doves. In the summer, we have white-throated swifts, and at dusk, if you're ever out here, over the north parking lot here, they'll circle, and we'll get 300 or 400 of these little white-throated swifts, and they circle, and about the time it turns dark, they all dive for their holes in the rock.
Oh, really?
It's really amazing to see. But they're a migratory bird, and so they've all gone south for the winter now. They're the smart ones. But the Tower of Babel, that's the highest point in the park here, at 300 feet. I don't see a lot of birds around today. Usually we have a lot of rock doves flying around. Here we call them, in the park, we call them rock doves. Elsewhere in the city, they're called pigeons. So we'll walk on down a little bit.
Okay. Ooh.
Here is, I like this as an example of how the rocks get formed, because you can see how the rocks are layered in there. We go through a session of where there's an ocean here, and then we dry out and become arid, and then there's more sand deposited during that arid season, and then we get oceans again, and so it just builds upon itself over the course of time. This is one of our.
Can't see a little red in this rock right here.
Yeah, there is some. We don't know. There's no explanation as to why this is white with a little bit of red in it. You can see some up there. But it's a younger rock than that, so whether that had something to do with
probably,
it, we don't know. We have a lot of graffiti here. That's one of our big problems in the park.
Yeah.
I can see, I'll look at this today, and I come back on Fridays and do the tour on Friday afternoons, and there'll be a new set of graffiti.
Oh, really?
It's horrible.
Oh, wow.
All the brush you see around here is all gamble oak, is scrub oak. They're not like the big oak trees you get back on the East Coast in the central part of the country. These don't get much taller than what you see around here.
Great hiding place for wildlife.
Oh yeah.
Oh,
The deer love it. But the thing with gamble oak or with scrub oak is, out of all this stuff in this area here, there's probably one, maybe two parents they have a root system that spreads, and once you get them started, they're like aspen trees. You can't get rid of them.
Huh.
They're worse than weeds, but they're nice. The deer love them,
Yeah.
and the birds love them. So we'll go on down a little bit.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, to be sure it's not candy.
This area through here is called JC Plaza, because up until '95, when we redid a lot of the infrastructure here, the JCs had a pavilion here, and we used to have cowboy dinners, cowboy dances, and things like that here. If you look at some of the older pictures, you'll see the JC Plaza, the pavilion and everything, and you'll see pictures of Kirk Douglas, John Wayne, and some of the older cowboys from the cowboy movies that would come and frequent this while they were doing films in this area. This tree right here is somewhat unique. It's a cottonwood tree. The cottonwood trees you typically find along riverbanks, stream banks, because they take a lot of water. So why do we have a cottonwood tree in the middle of a fairly arid, rocky park? Well, in '95, when they tore the pavilion down, the water line ran from the parking lot down to the pavilion. And they terminated it right here. There's no water in it now, but what happens when it rains, water collects around the pipe, flows down the pipe, and ends right here. So now we have a hot cottonwood tree in the middle of a high desert park. It's amazing. But if you look back on the side over here to the west, it's kind of hard to differentiate now because everything is the leaves are off the trees, but a lot of the tops of the trees are dead. We had a fire back here 4 or 5 years ago, but the dead wood in the trees is not from the fire. It's the gamma has. When we have a drought, and we've had a drought here for the last 4 or 5 years, the tops of the trees die out, and that allows the bottom of the tree to survive when it's a drought. They never come back, but it still allows that tree to survive.
Sure. Huh.
Do they ever cut back this brush? No. It's all natural in here. They do mitigation in some areas, but a lot of areas we don't do any kind of mitigation or anything else.
There's snakes?
Yes, we have snakes, sweetie. That's why we have these signs up all through the park. When you're hiking in the park, stay on the sidewalks or on the marked trails, because we do have snakes. We do have 3 or 4 people bitten every year.
Really?
A number of dogs get bitten because they're off the trails where they're not supposed to be. Most of our bites typically happen in the spring, and they're mostly by younger, smaller snakes, because the babies, the infant snakes, or adolescents, if you want to call them, are much more aggressive than a full adult. And their venom is much more concentrated.
Oh, really?
So we tell people, stay on the trails because of the snakes. But the other thing is, if we get a lot of illegal trails, when we get rain, it causes a lot of erosion in the park and causes a lot of damage in the park.
Yeah.
So this plant right here, yucca plant,
Oh, yeah.
really integral to the Native Americans' way of life. The Indians used everything on that plant. In the spring, you get a spike that comes up and has really gorgeous white blooms on it, white petaled flowers. And the flowers are really sweet. They're really good in salads. Only problem is you got to fight the deer. We've got four yucca plants in our backyard, and they were just covered in blooms this spring. I think I got 3 flowers off them. The deer got the rest of them, and my dogs wouldn't keep them out of the yard. So let the deer have it. But the Indians used the leaves. They beat out the leaves, take the threads and stuff, the fibers out of the leaves, and weave them into ropes to make sandals, to make saddles, and material out of. The root of the yucca plant, unlike most plants, most plants have a root system that spreads out. The yucca has a tap root that goes down, a single tap root, and that may be 5 or 6 foot down. And the Indians used to take the tap root, boil it down, render it down, and make soap out of it.
Oh, really?
Now, I don't recommend that. I've had that. I've actually used some of it, and I really don't recommend it.
You wonder how they discover these benefits of some of these, you know.
Some of it's by hapstance, some of it, passed down generation to generation.
Obviously take over a great deal of time. Oh yeah. Yeah.
Going up towards
Yeah.
If you look through the scrub oak here, there's a couple of caves in the rock there, holes in the rock.
Oh yeah.
In that is the earliest known graffiti in the park. We think it was probably a hunter or trapper that took shelter from the weather. Didn't have anything to do, so carved his initials and the date in there, which goes back to 1741. That's the earliest known European involvement in Garden of the Gods.
Huh.
So, and the first known graffiti in the garden. And then make sure you see the white buffalo up on the top of the rock.
Oh yeah. That's interesting. Huh.
Oh, yeah.
There's our little doe.
Oh yeah.
Usually this time of the day they're over here on the ground. Deer over here. We have Rocky Mountain sheep up on the top of White Rock. We had we got over on the other side over here the bobcat. So all in one fell swoop. It was like, oh, we just hit the price tag.
Do the bobcats, do they avoid people at all?
Typically
do
they
stay
do.
back?
Typically they do. Now, as you go through the park, you'll see a lot of signs like this
Oh yeah.
for climbing. We do allow climbing in the park. They have to have a permit, but the permits are free. All the routes are pre-marked routes in the park, so they don't set their own anchors and pittons and destroy the rocks. We have a group that comes in the spring each year and resets the pittons, resets the anchors, so the individual climbers aren't setting their own and
Okay.
further destroying the rocks. Most places where they climb, they have a white chalk they use on their hands. Here, it's a specially formulated red chalk. So it doesn't mark the rocks, it doesn't destroy the rocks or leave unsightly. Because we get thousands of people in here in the summer that climb. And if they're all climbing with white hands, it would really leave
bet.
it'd be a trail of handprints all the way up. But when we get around, I'll show you, I'll point out an area we call Tourist Gulch. Because every year we end up having to call high angle rescue for the fire department to get people off the rocks. They scramble up the rocks, get up there, and then they turn around and look down, and that's when they panic and can't come down, and so we end up, or they end up having to call high angle rescue to get them off of the rocks. Well, first of all, it's a $500 fine for climbing without a permit. And second of all, when they get down, the fire department's going to give them a bill anywhere from $1,500 to $3,000 for coming up to rescue them off of the rocks.
Wow.
So it gets really expensive. And the permit's free.
So, yeah. I don't know. The permits just to be sure that people are trained and they know what they're doing. They've got gear.
A couple of months ago, I was up on Cathedral Spires and scrambling, and no permit or anything, and fell about 60 feet. They had his
Yeah.
This area here is called Central Plaza. It's kind of central to the main portion of the garden. But the important part of it is the plaque put up by the city to commemorate Americans donating the original land to the city. Now, if you live back here in the 1880s, over on the eastern side of the park, you could have bought property. It was all platted out. It was going to be called Garden City, but they never sold any of the lots. It was sold one lot. Sold it to a guy named Fatty Rice. And right at the corner when you came in, Fatty built a beer joint, which didn't really set well with the Perkins family or with Palmer, because Palmer was a teetotaler too. And so Fatty died about the turn of the century, and Perkins finally talked his wife into selling him the property, and he was going to make a guest house, bed and breakfast kind of thing out of it for people to visit in the park. Never did. And a couple of years after he bought it, it just kind of mysteriously burned down. But the area was never built on. It was platted out, but never built. So Palmer eventually donated that area, that section of land, back to the city to be included into the park. Now we have 1,336 acres in the park. The city has added and bought some, and people have donated land over the course of time. So now we're up at about 1,330 plus acres. So it makes a nice sized park. Inside the park, like I said, we got the scrub oak, we've got ponderosa pine, we've got pinyon pine, and we've got junipers. So we've got a varied ecological makeup in the park, along with the native grasses and everything else. And we try to keep it as natural as we can. So we go on up and around. If you look up here, this cut that goes up where the brush is up on there, that's called Tourist Gulch. and they scramble up there, and they get about 2/3, 3/4 of the way up there,
I can
and it
see
doesn't
that.
look like it's really bad. And then they turn around and they figure out, oh, can't get down, and that's when we end up calling for high angle rescue to get them down off of there.
Yeah, no, it's a little steeper.
Yeah.
Certainly a different angle on it will give you a different perspective.
Hey, Mom! Mary Ann, we're turning this way.
Anyway, this is,
Oh,
I was here Friday. This is all new since Friday.
so did they come and clean it off, or just
It'll eventually wash off.
if it with rain?
Yeah, but this is one of my favorite spots in the park because I can show the geology of the park here.
Oh,
This is sandstone. If you feel it, it's nice and smooth.
Okay.
So it's where it gets its name from being sandy. And it's a sedimentary stone. This is conglomerate. This is made washed in by wave action out of oceans or wind action and so forth, and deposited. Conglomerate is washed in by rivers, and there used to be a river that ran through here. So, but the important thing about this is you have conglomerate and sandstone, you have conglomerate and sandstone. And remember I said there's a fault line across the western part of the park. Well, 65 million years ago when we had the upheaval here, you can see the fault line and how that shifted. Because that would have been in line with each other. So it shows the forces of nature when you get upheaval.
yeah.
If you go up Highway 24 and you look up on the north side of the road, you can see a lot of the fault lines in there from when this was all had the upheaval.
You can see how vertical this is
Yep.
right here.
Yep.
Yeah. Look at how.
So those were,
Yeah. It's amazing that it shifted around that much.
yeah, oh yeah, oh yeah. And then in the center here, this is a softer stone. It was probably mud that was deposited in between these two spires. And eventually this is all going to erode away. In another million years, we'll have two separate spires here. Right now, we call it bacon because that's what it looks like. But my children think that I'm going to be around here to see it all wash away. They think I was here to begin
Yeah,
with. You
yeah,
know?
yeah.
But because we have this fault line that runs up the entire Front Range, we still get half a dozen or so earthquakes here every year.
Really?
Nobody ever feels them. I think I've felt 2 in the last 30 years. The only reason we know that we get them is because the National Seismographic Lab up in Boulder picks them up on their seismographs. And they're minor, they're deep, so we never even know. But we still get them every once in a while. But they're different. These are a fault line where you have an upheaval where one plate rides over the other one. Not like California where you have slip faults.
Oh, yeah.
Where pressure builds up and then the whole thing shifts. So they're much different fault lines.
Yeah.
Usually, if I've got a big group, I'll get 1 or 2 or 3 gin drinkers in it. Juniper trees.
Oh,
Gin. from the what these are, they get them from the berries, but these are actually not berries. They're seed pods. They're like pine cones for the juniper. But that's a juniper tree, and this is a juniper tree. No berries, berries. Male, female.
oh, wow.
They're one of the few species of tree that is gender specific.
It, it's kind of mind-boggling in a way because you don't think of trees.
No,
as having
you don't.
Gender.
But they're one of the few species of tree that is gender specific. Now, all these trees that we have in the park are not native to the park. They're native to Colorado, but not to the park. If you look at some of the older pictures, there's no trees in the park. People drive their cars right up against the rocks and park and everything else. 1933-34, as part of the recovery from the Great Depression, the Civilian Conservation Corps came in here and planted thousands of trees into the park. They also put in the first infrastructure in the park, sidewalks, roads, and things like that. These retaining walls, rock retaining walls you see when you drive around, all put in by Civilian Conservation Corps. So some of the trees date back to the 1930s. Some of them have died off, and some have been repopulated since then. But we have trees in the park. Some of the old one-seated junipers go back over 900 years. So there's a lot of old trees. We don't tell people where they are.
Did they feel it was a benefit to plant trees here?
Yeah, it enhanced the park. It also helped with the recovery from the Great Depression. There were three civilian conservation corps groups in this area that did a lot of public works projects.
Boy, you can see a lot of those holes, little cave holes up there.
Here we have Pikes Peak,
Oh, yeah.
America's mountain. A little bit of snow left. There'll be a whole lot more snow come Wednesday morning, I'll guarantee you. But it's named after Zebulon Pike, who was a explorer, mapper for the government. He came out here to map the furthest reaches of the Louisiana Purchase when it was made. Funny thing is, although it's named for Pike, he never made it to the top of Pikes Peak. Came up from the southern exposure, got about 3/4 of the way up in November, ran into snow, didn't have the right gear, right food, or anything else, and had to turn around and go back down.
November, bad time to start.
But because he was the one that originally mapped all this, they named it after him. So Pike went back down to where Pueblo probably is now, further south across what is now Levita Pass into San Luis Valley, and was mapping the area where the Sand Dunes National Monument is now. Only problem is that at the time still belonged to Spain. And the Spanish government, the Spaniards, arrested Pike and his men for trespassing.
Really?
Took them all down to Veracruz in New Mexico, where they spent 3 years as guests of the Mexican or the Spanish government until they figured out that they were fairly benign and turned them loose to come back up to this country. So doesn't pay to trespass on somebody else's property. But
weren't there people
so-
all the time who would go across the boundaries?
Yeah, but there wasn't that many people out here. You know, when he was out here in the turn of the century, 1800s, there's not that many people out this way.
Yeah.
So most of them were itinerant Indian tribes that had no understanding of boundaries or anything else.
Yeah.
Hunters, trappers that, they weren't doing anything. There's some speculation that Pike was a spy for the government, but nothing's ever been documented or ever been written that confirms or denies that. So, who knows? Pikes Peak, also where Catherine Lee Bates got the inspiration for writing the poem America the Beautiful.
Yeah. Okay.
So it has to do a lot with the history of Colorado.
might have enough upper body strength to reduce
Yeah.
Guys go up to like a playground, like behind it, like in the trees, and
Climbers up on the top up there. Anyway, can you see
They
the?
climb on this face?
Oh yeah,
do they?
yeah. There's a route. There's a couple of routes over on the end of the center here. Can you see the Indian head? There's a lighter red rock against the darker red background, and it's the head of an Indian. There's two humps up there, and then there's the one comes up down his forehead, down his nose to where there's a little bush, and then back to the right where his eye hole is. Can you see that?
Up here.
Yeah. That's called the weeping Indian because it sits out away from the rock face a little bit, and there's a communicating hole between that ledge and his eye, and when it rains, the water just literally pours out of his eye. It's amazing to see.
that is cool.
Stop
But if you look straight down from his eye, there's a round hole in the rock and a black tarry looking substance in the hole. You see that?
Yeah.
That black tarry looking substance is 4,200-year-old Mexican brown pack rat poop. Now, why do we talk about pack rat poop? Well, two things. First of all, the kids get a real kick out of it. But second of all, what it does is it gives us an insight into what this environment was like 4,000 years ago. The geology department at Colorado College has carbon dated it to 4,200 years ago. So there's pollens, there's seeds, there's small animal bones and things like that are embedded into that and fossilized. So when they tear it apart, they get an idea of what it was like to live here that many years ago. Now, back then, that may have only been the size of a tennis ball hole. And the Mexican brown pack rats populated a lot of these holes in the rocks. And a lot of them communicate with other holes. And then over the course of time, the wind and rain have eroded it away. So it's a big hole for us to see what's going on up there. If you look down towards the end of the rock, there's a lot of dark striations in the rock, and you'll see that all over the park itself. That's called varnish. And what it is are the remains of bacterium that live in the rock, die off, and that's their carcasses cause the staining in the rocks. Doesn't hurt the rocks, just looks unsightly, but we don't do anything about it. So this is typically where I end the walk, and you're more than welcome to go on up around the upper loop. Three Graces cathedral spires are up there. If you're sitting on the wall looking to the north, there's a rock there. It's called Heart Rock. There is a heart in there. It's not a Valentine's type heart, but it's a regular anatomical heart with right and left ventricles. So it's up there. There's some nice views from up there. But like I say, this is typically where I leave everybody.
So do you have, how much farther does it
Just goes up the other side of these rocks and then turns and comes back down on the other side of the park, or you can come back down on this way. You can go on up to where there's a trail that goes